Jacqui, welcome. I'm so excited to speak with you today.
It's really wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Jacqui, you wrote a beautiful book, which is called Stop Worrying About Money. And that book was intended to normalize conversations around money and mortality. And I was wondering if you could share with us what have you seen happen both emotionally and financially when families avoid talking about these important topics?
The interesting thing is really one of the things I tried to highlight in the book was the value of communication around money and how keeping secrets about money or not talking about money can be really problematic in relationships. And even worse, when people don't understand it. And I think you put all of your family at a disadvantage if you don't talk to them about money or wealth. And so I do see people use, money is power in many respects. And I've seen it used really poorly in families where people don't communicate more openly about money. But actually, there's a development of all of our financial literacy, if you like. The more regular you talk about money and make it a conversation that can be had at home, I think that you're helping everyone develop better skills about money as well. So where I've seen it used poorly in relationships is when family support other family members financially, but don't explain, how the money's earned, how it's used, how long that money might be available for. Some I've seen very entitled adults whose parents have been paying for things for them for their whole lives and continue to expect that, but also don't necessarily stand on their own 2 feet.
So, where does one begin to build their financial literacy? And what dialogues need to happen within families with those close to us in order to normalize these conversations?
One of the most powerful things, and I do write about this early on in the book, that I've seen used really well, and in fact, some of the best stories that I've received back or feedback from people is when they go through the process of engaging their family in what I call open the front door costs. So, knowing what it costs to run your household. And this might sound really basic, but it's quite fundamental to engaging all ages and all members of a household in what it costs to open your front door. So the reality of understanding things like the internet, the electricity, the gas, the water, the rates, all the rent or the mortgage, all of those things are incredibly relevant in recognizing what is required to run your lifestyle. And that's before all the fun stuff, the entertainment or the Uber Eats or the Netflix. What I've learned is that I regularly review that personally, always have, just to recognize I was a single mum at a point in time in my life, and actually starting from scratch, that was one of the ways I found really valuable to just get in control of my money. And a lot of people often feel a little bit out of control with it. So that's a really valuable way to get people to focus on what actually counts and how to address it. Because it's very easy to think more money coming in the door, that'll fix all my problems, but it doesn't work that way. Actually, what you've got to, the leverage you've got is, yes, the career or the work that you choose to do, but actually how you spend your money is a very significant lever. And being in control of those basic things first is so powerful. And you think about people often live beyond their means. And we talk about the impact of things like expense creep. And I'm often coaching or working with people to reduce the impact. A lot of people are on a very significant treadmill, and you get on that treadmill, you're working, you're earning a certain amount of income, and you tend to build your lifestyle around the income that you've got. And so getting people to actually recognize that by taking control of what you're spending helps you determine whether you want to stay on that treadmill. Now, the other thing that all of us have experienced is things like expense creep. And so whether it's the cost of petrol at the Bowser, the cost of electricity, just your lifestyle. So I think as people earn more money, they tend to spend a little bit more. They're a little bit more generous with the type of groceries they buy, how many times they might eat out a week. And again, in the absence of realizing the impact of that, by knowing what it costs to open your front door, you can't really control what happens then. And where do you stop? If there's no money, sure, you can stop, but then there's things like credit cards and there's buy now, pay later or afterpay. There's so many options to get around maybe not having the money in the bank today. So, getting back to what it costs to open your front door is a really powerful exercise to get started. And you can engage everyone in that journey. And I've had parents say it's the first time they've been able to explain to their kids why they want them to turn the lights off, when they leave all the lights on at home, leave the TVs running or whatever it might be. There's actually a reason, and that's because it comes into this cost base of running this household or the family.
How early would you say that it's important to expose kids to the concept of money, savings, budgeting?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question, Andrew. I think as early as practical, and pick your battles. I think one of the fun things is to take the kids to the supermarket, which is probably a relatively normal experience, and show children the difference between buying one product, the same product, but of a different brand, and recognizing that process of buying a product, picking the product from the shelf, looking at the sticker of the price, and then taking that all the way through to the checkout where you're actually paying for it, showing them that money, that amount again appearing on an invoice or receipt, if you like, and then you paying for it. I think, we talk about like no frills or name home brand product versus a fancy brand product, and just seeing the difference in price. A typical thing of flour, probably one of the cheapest, or sugar, that one of the cheapest products you can get in most supermarkets, is the variation in prices. Just actually showing children that, I think, is a great way to recognize the cost of things. But maybe the other way is, at what point in time do you engage kids in things like pocket money or savings? So sort of two sides to that coin. And look, I think as early as they're interested. So if kids are interested in picking up chores around the house or helping you do things, is there a monetary value you can attach to that? And I'm not necessarily encouraging that you pay for everything that the kids do to help around the house, but because you can do it in a non-monetary way as well. But you can also support that behavior, if you like, by setting aside some money in savings. And I think that's a great conversation to have with kids. When they're young, the first bit of money they earn, they want to spend. And I don't know if you remember, but I certainly do. Like the first $5 I got in a Christmas card from an auntie or something like that was really exciting. And all I wanted to do was go and spend it. And there's a really good conversation I think you can have with kids to just pause on that and say, well, if they save that towards something they wanted to buy, and if they help doing a few chores at home, you might double that money in time, and it might buy them something that they've coveted a little more. As kids get older, it becomes things like an Xbox or a gaming console or a new subscription. And then you can work towards those things, or a nice pair of sneakers, which is probably where it starts to get in the teenage years, buying their own clothing independently. I think you can work towards those things in a good way, but having sort of valuing the conversation. What I think we're trying to start is the principle around saving. We're so used to having this immediate reward now, and we get so much of that with social media, for example, that actually having a little bit of a deferment of that reward, but valuing sort of what happens at the end of that, I think is, again, a really good conversation.
How early would you recommend that we expose our teenage or even adult children to investing?
What's one of the things that is really interesting generationally is how readily accessible investing is now. And I think ETFs have really changed that, and digital platforms that you can access now for investing have really opened things up. Look, I think as early as someone's prepared to invest is a good time to start. It's the difference between putting your money in a bank account that doesn't earn interest and finding a bank account that does earn interest, or a bonus interest arrangement, I think is a really good start. Certainly with our kids, we started trying to identify with them where they might get better bang for their buck, if you know what I mean. So actually finding an institution or a banking institution that might offer them better return on their money. So I don't think there's any too early age for investing. Perhaps the only thing I'd be mindful of is there's a lot of gambling that goes on today in the world, and it's accessible from a very young age in the simplest form, like buying tokens on games, or things that just require you to get better at it. You need to buy more of these things, to progress different levels. You need to have fancier in terms of the gaming world. And I think being careful with investing that kids don't see that, because I think there can be a lot of pressure associated with it as well. If you follow the market too closely, you're susceptible to the gain and loss experience that I think can perhaps affect your mental health as well. If you're too tied to it, like too caught up by it, what I'd like to encourage is people to do their research. So a lot of people, as an accountant, people would invariably turn up to meetings with me and say, oh, I was at a barbecue on the weekend and somebody said I should invest in a certain company. And I'd say, what do you know about that company? To which they'd reply, well, my mate told me that, they've done really well, or they're about to do this and about to do that. And I say, well, you do your own research. And I think for kids, that's what you want to encourage them to do. The thing about investing that's really powerful is I think it also, if kids are engaged, it's actually starting them on this journey of building their financial literacy. What we're trying to encourage is more exposure to financial things. And so the more that they're interested, I think you want to take that with two hands and say, let's go for it. But make sure that they are reading and building their skills around investing and recognizing that there are cycles in the financial world. Things go up, things go down, and that really what we want to encourage is people to independently verify to the best of their ability what they're doing in the investment space. And
Yes.
and perhaps this, what I could add on to that, one of the things I do talk about in my book is a personal finance village. And for kids, like with your first question actually around money and families, for kids, one of the best things we can do is introduce them to people that can provide a sounding board for them when it comes to things like finance. And when I talk about the personal finance village, it's easy for you and I to say we might have our accountant, we might have a lawyer, we might have a psychologist or a counselor. These are all people that or a coach, people that form part of your personal finance village, which is this trusted sounding board to help you take the emotion out of decisions as well. And so, what can you do with younger kids to introduce them to your network? It might be your accountant who you said, do you mind just mentoring my child? The things like that. I mean, you want the kids to drive it a bit as well, but who in your network can you introduce the children to help guide them to start working on this journey around building financial literacy and their investment capability? And same for us as adults is saying, who do we have in our village? And, one of the things I often see is that in relationships, somebody has the key relationship with the advisor, but the other partner doesn't. And so that means they tend to dial out of those conversations. And what we really want is both people participating. Now, I'm not sure if you've heard me get on my soapbox about wanting to ensure that people are financially accountable in relationships, but to themselves. A lot of people, and I think women in particular, we get busy. There's a lot of mental load or just physical load with families and working, and we often delegate financial responsibility in our households. The difficulty with that is over time that drops your financial literacy and makes it difficult for you to re-engage. And so one of the advantages of having someone in your personal finance village that keeps you a bit accountable is that you feel like you want to spend time with them. You feel like you need to check in with them. If it's someone that your spouse has chosen to advise you and you don't have the same rapport with them, then change. Find somebody for you. I think that's really important that you find someone. It's like finding a motor mechanic or a plumber, somebody that actually you trust, somebody you can communicate and connect with. You need those people on money as well in your life. So don't just settle for the person that maybe a partner in your household has chosen. Find somebody that works for you. I think that's incredibly valuable. And I think for kids, introducing them to our networks, again, I mean, one of the single biggest challenges with the wealth in the world is that often those who hold the wealth have a great network of advisors around them, but they don't necessarily share that network with the next generation. It's like the kind of worst kept secret. The reality of that is, though, the only way to get the next generation to take the wealth on successfully is to have that advice around them.
Since you spoke about women and taking control, a lot of research is showing, particularly given the pay gap that we have, sadly, still in certain organizations or societies, many women actually enter retirement with a significantly lower amount of funds than their male counterparts or their partners. What advice would you have for women in terms of taking control of what they do prior to retirement to make sure that they shorten that gap?
Yeah, look, a really good question. The number one thing is taking financial responsibility. And that might sound a bit scary, it might sound a bit daunting, but the reality is now at my age, a lot of the conversations are actually around, and not so much around transition to retirement, but actually starting to think about what does that look like. And it is scary because statistically, aside from the pay gap and time particularly being taken out of the workforce to raise children, is actually the other dilemma now, which is the what I call planet squeeze, which is the aging parents as well. And so it seems to fall on women that aging parents and navigating the challenges around neurodegenerative health issues that are, the longer we live, we seem to suffer from things like Alzheimer's and dementia and needing more care. And a lot of this falls on women. So there's lots of distractions from actually doing things like looking at super. And in fact, the other thing I write about on Substack every week or fortnight now, Andrew, and a lot of people are in terms of so grey divorce is quite a phenomenon that's evolving globally. And a lot of women in their 50s and so on are actually heading down that path. And again, the reality of that is superannuation is a big factor. And that is something so significant in terms of your overall wealth that you really want to pay attention. In different, around the world, there's different strategies for adding to your superannuation. But I'm encouraging people to think very carefully about that because globally, generally, super is taxed concessionally or not at all, depending on what format it's in. And it's something that you really are setting aside for your retirement, and it needs attention. And because of all the reasons that we've just talked about, it's often missing that level of attention. But it's one important asset that we need to work on. So for all women, the first thing, as I said, was financial responsibility. The second thing would be don't delegate. So back to the conversation we're having about the distractions, if you like, or the reasons why we have so much on our plate, we maybe decide, yes, I'll let someone else take care of this. I'm saying, no, now is your time. If you haven't up until now is your time to not delegate this, get on top of it. I can't emphasize that enough. The more you know, the more powerful it is. Also, look, I think in the whole cycle of life, the challenges that we go through, there could be death of a partner or someone gets sick and you need to refocus on these types of things. I think if you're grieving as well, the loss of like parents or if something happens to a partner, these things can take up so much energy that if you haven't continued to maintain a level of financial responsibility and I say literacy, it makes it really hard. And at that time in your life, you don't need that. So you can't. I like the idea of the earlier you get onto it, the smoother the sailing will be, regardless of all the sort of ups and downs that we have in life.
And the earlier we plan for retirement, the better, right?
Oh, 100%. And so many people are getting on the bandwagon of retirement when they're looking at a couple of years out. No. I think our lives are partly about evolving this cycle, looking at what type of lifestyle I would like to lead when I retire. And the reality is, if you're on a big salary today, that money is unlikely to be there when you retire. So what are you doing to change it? What are you doing to get comfortable with your lifestyle today? And this is why that treadmill that I was talking about earlier is so important, because if you've got a lifestyle that is right size to your income today, what does that look like in retirement? So if you've got fancy cars, got a big house and a big mortgage, you travel regularly, you don't sort of have any real restrictions around your spending, what does that lifestyle look like when you're retired? It's frightening. So there's an opportunity for everyone now listening to go and say, what does it cost to open my front door? Is that okay? And is that sustainable in the future? And then I like to say, well, if it doesn't look like it is, what can you cut back to put into savings or investment to help fund that retirement down the track?
What would be your advice in terms of percentages of the earnings that a person has, let's say on a monthly basis? What percentage of that would you recommend for savings in case there are emergencies or unexpected expenses versus the component that is more related to retirement? Can you give us a bit more detail on what your recommendations are?
It's a really hard one to answer, but I would suggest 20 to 30% of your income is saved. So set aside, and whether that's in the emergency bucket or actually the lifetime savings bucket, I think that's a really good place to start. And I don't know that people are doing that typically today. The thing that probably is happening more is people are getting towards retirement, and the thing that they're doing then they're selling their family home to fund their retirement. So the best way that you can approach it, apart from recognizing that retirement horizon is out there, it's coming at all of us, like so is death, but actually 20 to 30% of your income at every age can be of real value to starting to build up your savings and investment for, yes, things going wrong and or retirement.
What have you observed through all the clients you have worked with about the relationship between wealth, happiness, and joy?
The number one thing is that more money doesn't bring you happiness. That's the bottom line. So, when it comes to, I work with some very wealthy families, some of the wealthiest families in Australia, and I have worked with the wealthiest families in Asia as well. And the relationships that they have with money and with each other are tortured by the fact that they have more money. It's like more money, more problems. So money doesn't solve your problems. I think that's the key thing. And we all have the opportunity to take responsibility for money and for our wealth. And the sooner you do that, even if you are in a family with money, the better. Yeah.
And what does a joyful relationship with money actually look like in your view?
Look, I think systems and patterns and processes are really valuable with money. So it's a bit like, I still remember, I won't mention them now, but some of the famous entrepreneurs in the world have talked about how, and politicians actually, around their wardrobe. That simple wardrobe where they get up each day and they put those same things on every day. And I think money's a bit similar. When you set up patterns for saving, like having money automatically divert to a savings account, some money go into your everyday account, some money maybe go to investments, whatever that might be. I think that's really powerful. So having a system in place, almost the decisions made for you. It's like setting things aside for a rainy day. That's kind of what we're doing with money. And I think systems like that can be real. So recognizing, it's a bit like if you've put on a kilo or five, and you need, your pants are a bit tight. So you need to say, okay, I need to go back and revisit my open the front door costs to see what am I doing there. So regularly reviewing how you're spending is of value, but then also having systems in place so that your savings are automated and you have a checkpoint, which is if it is every month or every quarter, you're reviewing those costs to say, okay, we need to, bring our belts in a little bit because we've kind of let go. And other things too, depending on your spending habits, is are you a person that should have credit cards? So try and make it easy on yourself. Don't make it hard. I think less is more. So having a bank account, not 5 bank accounts, can be good. I'm sure a second one for savings, setting those aside makes sense. But keeping it simple, I think, is of great value as well.
Since you've spoken about bank accounts, Do you actually suggest that couples that are married share one bank account or that they manage their own respective bank accounts?
Well, I do get asked this a bit, and statistically, people who share bank accounts apparently are more successful as couples. Now, I've seen evidence to the contrary, of course. I do think there's value in it because it is very difficult to manage household finances separately. So I don't mind the idea of having, a play account that you might have set aside that, but again, you want to have like a budget for that, right? So I think the communication about one of the things that we haven't perhaps talked about today is financial goal setting. Now, I think in any family, this is incredibly valuable. And I think for couples in particular, whether you're managing separate or joint bank accounts, is that what we want to achieve financially together is largely measured by what's in that bank account and what's happening around you with money, whether it be where you live, how your lifestyle, how you spend, how you eat, all those things are factors. So getting together to set financial goals. And look, a lot of people say, oh, like that's the last thing I'm going to get my partner to do is come, sit down and have a conversation about financial goals. But I say, no, make it your life goals. What are your goals as a couple? And invariably, we know that underpinning goals, it might be I want to go and spend 3 months in Europe over Christmas. I want to take a sabbatical. I want to do a renovation. I want to move to a different town. These things all cost money. So, working out there's lots of steps to get to that destination, but what are the financial steps that you need to take? And I think working on those together can be really powerful. But the financial goal setting just enables an alignment for every time you spend money, is it aligned with that goal we've set together? So, I mean, to come full circle, joint bank accounts are incredibly powerful in that regard. I think the minute you start to splinter off, what are you really doing? What commitments are you really making together around your financial savings? Yeah, I'm not sure where that will lead you.
I want to go back to the topic of joy. And if there would be a recipe for joy, what would be the three main ingredients that you think are important to live more joyfully?
Well, the title of my book is Stop Worrying About Money. So I think there's a lot of joy in not having to worry. And I think that comes from having systems in place so that you keep it simple around money. I also think, when I said less is more. So there is a bit of a phenomenon, the have more, want more phenomenon. And I think living more simply brings great joy. And I think the older you get, you realize that. But, more stuff doesn't make us happier. And the path to joy, I think, is having systems in place so that it's simple and that you feel safe. Because one of the other things is financial security is important and perhaps more important for women than they realize often. And to build financial security, you need knowledge. So you need to know what's going where, when it's happening. And I think joy comes from feeling confident in knowing where your money is, what's happening with it, what you're planning to do with it. So I think these are all factors that will contribute to joy when it comes to money. And perhaps recognizing yourself too. If you're earning an income, is recognizing what you bring to that financial goal or being accountable to yourself around money and acknowledging that.
You also specialize in helping people think about their legacy. What does a healthy legacy actually look like? And what advice would you have for families that may want to begin planning their legacy and taking the proper actions today?
I think for me, the thing about legacy is education. So, what can you share or teach, or what can someone share or teach with the next generation to make it a better one? And I see lots of families setting up, people set up things like foundations to support a cause in the community that their family is engaged in. That's sort of one path, but the other one, more simply, that's available to each of us is how can we educate the next generation, and whether that be about money and how to use it and how not to use it and how to save it, how to protect it. I spend a lot of time helping people protect their wealth. Now, that kind of feels like it goes out the door when if somebody dies, or if certainly if people get divorced. It doesn't feel like that's so true. But I do think that the legacy, how you support building a legacy is through education and learning. So, do you provide education? Again, back to the networks. Do you introduce people to your network, your family, and your family to your network? I think these are really powerful. I think just where I see traps with legacy is that people who have the skills, who become very successful, they know it all, but the next generation don't. And that can be a really tough bridge for people to connect on. And so, how can you take them on that journey to some extent? I mean, nobody can ever walk in your shoes, but you'd like them to try when you're developing skills of that next generation, in terms of legacy. But look, I think it's a tough one. I think it's getting harder as well. But instilling values around basic values, I think, are obviously a very important part of legacy for anyone. But in the context of money, I think it comes from communication and education.
There's also one component linked to building a solid will. It's something that some of us maybe put on the back burner and delay until maybe it's too late. What advice would you have in terms of when should be the right time to actually build that will, make those important decisions before it's actually too late?
Yeah, everybody should have a will. Once you've got any asset, I don't care if it's a car, some money in the bank, you should have a will. And I am forever checking in with people, and I see people's eyes roll or people want to turn away. If I'm talking about making sure that you have I say to people, have you got a current will? And then people say, yes, yes, yes. And then they go and look and it was done 15 years ago or even 5 years ago. Now, first, let's say you must have a will. A lot of people don't have a current will at all. And one of the things I encourage people to do is to regularly review their estate planning. So if anything changes, if there's been a relationship change, if there's been change, like if you've had another child. I have people who've had 3 children and haven't had their wills updated since their first child. People whose spouses are no longer their spouses and they're still in the will. So it's like one of those pieces of admin that people want to put off. I'd say a will is better than no will. And even when I see a lot of couples get stuck, they go, yes, we're going to do our wills. And they go to the lawyer and they get asked some really hard questions and they don't have the answers. It could be something as simple as, who's going to be the guardian for the children? Or if you all die, where's the money going to go? And they get stuck. And so what happens is they just don't, it's too hard, they just don't do it. A will is going to be so much better than no will. And if you're a family member, I am the executor for a lot of my clients. So I manage their estate if something happens, and it's good to know all the characters, if you like. A will is an opportunity to help guide that next generation. When you're talking about legacy, the better the will, the more comprehensive the will, the better chance for that next generation, if you haven't told them, to understand what you'd like to happen with your wealth. And that's not so easy in the absence of communicating that, whether you're alive or dead. So number one, you've got to have a will. And I just encourage people, when they hear this podcast today, if they haven't reviewed their will in the last 5 years, they've got to get it done. And the other thing is, in Australia, for example, if you don't have a will, the government decides what happens. And what I find often happens is a lot of money gets spent with lawyers and not going to your family. So if your will is not clear and it's difficult to interpret, then it's open to interpretation and people fight about it. Like contesting of wills is now much more commonplace than it used to be. And money gets chewed up with lawyers and the courts because people are arguing about what a will means. Now, I'd still rather have that conversation than someone without a will, but be wary that if your affairs are complicated and you're dropping that on the next generation to sort out, you need a comprehensive will. And the more that you talk about it beforehand, the other thing I like to do is engage a family in a conversation about what the will says now when I'm alive, so that they understand what my expectations are about how things should happen and who's responsible for what. And you want to do that every couple of years.
If someone listening today wants to take one powerful step towards a healthier, more intentional relationship with money, what challenge would you give them?
Well, number one, know what it costs to open your front door. I think that will be the most enlightening start to their day, week, month, and year.
Jacqui, what are the three most common money mistakes that you have seen across your clients that our audience should be aware of?
The number one money mistake that happens across all ages is wearing and driving your money. And so people spend, the first thing that happens when you first earn money is you buy clothes. And the next thing is you buy cars. And part of the phenomenon, I think, that goes with wearing and driving your money is when you're younger, you can't afford a house. And so the thing that you go to is what's accessible. And it tends to be clothes. So people spend money on clothes. And even as adults, I think when you look closely at what it costs to open your front door, whether it be handbags or golf clubs, we wear and drive our money. They're the things that we spend our dollars on. And so that's the first mistake. The second mistake, which a lot of women unfortunately commit, if you like, is putting their head in the sand. You know, the la 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 la, like, don't tell me. Because a lot of people think it works. So, it's not broken. So I don't need to do anything. I don't need to fix it. And so putting your head in the sand is a great risk, particularly to women. And one of the, what I would consider to be the second biggest money mistake. And the third one is simply not knowing what it costs to open your front door, so not knowing what your baseline costs are for running your life. So they're the three biggest money mistakes: wearing and driving your money, putting your head in the sand, and number three, just not knowing what your baseline costs are to run your lifestyle.
Jacqui, immense gratitude for your time today and everything you have shared.
Thank you for having me.